I'm going to talk to you about succession planning for a start. And so, just in summary, what we're going to cover off, for a start the need for a succession plan, as in why, setting the scene a bit, why do we actually need a succession plan in relation to our farm. Going to talk a bit, and this will help explain it, we're going to talk about a true succession plan, or a true story about a succession plan that just failed. It's a court case, and it brings out a lot of the issues around succession planning. So I'm just going to talk about that and the lessons that can be learned from that. The other thing I'm going to do, which I didn't do yesterday, I'm just going to put a timer on so I have an idea how long I'm talking for. Some steps in succession planning. Just going to cover off some steps that we should be looking at, just overall steps. And when I talk succession planning, and when we do it in front of a group, we don't want to get down to individual things and say, this is what you do this, and here's a plan. Because in succession planning, no two people are the same, and no two circumstances are the same. And I've talked to 4 different farmers recently, and not one of them will be dealt with the same as the other. They've all got different numbers of kids, different numbers of farms, different numbers of what the kids are looking for. So in succession, nothing is really the same, and I don't want to get down into specifics, but you can ask questions if you want. I've got some questions for you following on from that, just to challenge you a little bit about where you're at, and then I'll just summarise. The average age of a farmer in New Zealand is currently 58, average age. So you can see why succession planning's got to be a bit of a topic now, because... I'm out of here. Alright. Succession planning, often there's a emotional feeling or an moral feeling there's an obligation to look after the kids and to pass on the farm or whatever. That's one of the things about having a succession plan. Sometimes a succession plan enables the farmers just to ease out slowly. A lot of farmers don't just like to go bang farming one day, bang into town in a retirement village the next day. And the proper plan actually allows it to ease out slowly. Avoiding a family dispute is a reason to have a succession plan. Often these disputes come, mum and dad die, and then there's a big dispute. So sometimes it's dealt with before mum and dad die. We can get everything amicable between the family and not have a family torn apart after mum and dad have passed. The other reason is that there can be huge costs going to lawyers if you get it wrong, or if the family do end up in dispute. And sometimes children won't come back to the farm if the children are off living another life, but have a general interest in coming back farming. They're often not prepared to come back unless there is actually a plan, so they know where they are. Because this generation is more likely to want a plan, want to know where they're going to be, want to know things. And the other thing is that sometimes, if things all go wrong, a whole lot of family matters can become public as the fighting between the family members starts. Other things have changed. Things have changed over the last few generations. All children now want a share of the, in general, all children want a share of the parents' estate or wealth. They think that they're all entitled to a share. Step back a few generations, farm went to the eldest son, the other 2, 3 kids or whatever got nothing, and that was how things happened. And even now, even the courts are not prepared. The courts are quite happy to step in and say, no, that's not fair. And fair for the courts think fair is, another name for fair is equal. So, got to consider that, and that is one reason why if you deal with it before you die, because if you don't deal with it before you die, then it could end up in court. another reason around succession planning, everyone lives longer, on average. So you actually need more, if you're gonna live around longer, if you're gonna be off the farm longer, you actually need more money for retirement. And not to miss there, like people are used, they want to do more in their retirement now anyway. They want to go and see some of the world, so you actually have a bigger need in retiring now than you might have a couple of generations ago. Successors want the security, again, I think we've already mentioned that, of knowing where they are. Farms are worth a lot more. I had a look at one of my farmers just to see around about what they paid and what it's worth now, and that's just in their lifetime since they purchased the farm, about 5 times more. So when you think of it, there's actually there's quite a lot more wealth now tied up in the value of the farms. The successors. And so successors, by the way, we're meaning the kids that take over, or whoever that takes over, but not prepared to live as frugally as you might have once lived when you first took the farm, and you could, just scrape together enough to have the bread and butter and jam and some soup for lunch. Not prepared to live as frugally as what their parents want. Most parents actually don't want their kids to have to struggle how they may have struggled when they started out. I'll go from there and I'll go on to talk about the succession plan that actually failed. The court case, it was Scott versus Scott, and there were 2 farms, and this was happened around 2002 initially, and by the time it all went pear-shaped and got to court and settled in court, it was a 2012 court decision. So you can see how long was actually involved in a high court decision. In this, there were 2 farms. So there was the trust farm, which was actually the grandparents' farm. Grandparents are now deceased, but one of the farms that it was being handed down was the trust farm. Then there was the parents' farm as well. So the parents owned a farm in their own names. So that was the 2 farms. What happened is Dad died. All right, and the son talked to the mum and said, I think he was in London, somewhere overseas like that, and he said, "Listen, I'm prepared. I'll come home and run the farm, but I'd like to own it. I'd like to own the farm." So he come home, and he purchased half the home farm from the father's estate on a single valuation. Got one valuation, paid for it via a loan from the trust. And what's the point there is he was an executor of his father's estate. All right, so in effect he sold it to himself. All right, and in discussions with his mother, she promised, you'll get my half of the farm. And then this is the parents' farm we're talking about here. All right. Following on from that, without the son's knowledge, Mum and the 3 sisters decided that they would shift the trust farm to the 3 sisters, and exclude the brother. All right, so that was, and they might have had a thing saying, "Hey, listen, that's fair. He's got that farm, although really he hasn't got it because he's paid. He might have got half of it that he's bought, but he owes the money." And he's got Mum's maybe promise about the other half, and he didn't like that, so litigation actually commenced. What happened? Mum was not required to sell her half to the son, so that was one of the decisions of the court. No, Mum doesn't have to sell her half to the son. What the court said is there was a discussion that had never matured to the point where we got to getting the necessary terms of an agreement sorted out. All right, so there wasn't even got to the stage where you could say there's a verbal contract. It never got to that stage of actually setting all the terms and the amounts and the dates and anything like that. So the court said it never actually matured to the point of actually being a oral contract or anything like that. The second decision of the court was that the transfer of the trust farm to the sisters was reversed. All right. And what they said here is that there was a breach of the trustee and beneficiary duties. The trustees of that farm was mum and one of the daughters. They transferred it to the three daughters and left the son out. And the court said, no, that's a breach of the trustee duties. One of the primary responsibilities of a trustee is to consider all the beneficiaries. All right. And so there's a conflict of interest going on there. The other thing that happened is the sale of the half farm to the son was reversed. All right, so now he's got nothing. And in there they said it was a breach of his duties as the executor. He got no independent legal advice for the other three girls who were also, at the end of the day, the farm was left to the half farm of the parents' farm, so the father's half of it was left to the kids, the son and the three daughters. All right. So when he did that transfer, although he went and got a valuation, he never actually got independent legal advice for the other three girls to say, hey, was this a good decision for you to sell that half at that value to your brother? All right. And they said that was a breach of his duty as the executor. So what lessons come out of this? Oh, and so by the way, what happened there? The outcome of that was everything was back the way before they started. The trust farm was back in the trust. The parents' farm was back being owned half by mum and half by essentially by the executor for the four kids. It was all back to where it started. Except there would be very unhappy family members that would probably never be able to settle again. So what went wrong? Number one, they failed to get any really good legal advice that might have avoided some of the conflict of interest type scenarios that this imposed. They did get some legal advice. They got some advice from what I think looks like might have been the old long-term family solicitor. But it wasn't necessarily the right advice, obviously. The conflicts of interest, as we talked about, that's what it cost them in legal fees, $180,000 to get back where they started. All right. There was no succession plan. There really was no family succession plan. That's why it went wrong. And Dad died before there was one. Oral discussions, things that there wasn't evidence, they weren't evidenced in writing, so the son couldn't rely on Mum's promise that eventually he would get her half. And really they left the whole thing just too late. Just some other lessons. I'm not leaving it too late there because that's a common denominator. Left it too late. If it had been dealt with beforehand, it wouldn't actually be necessarily an issue. Money or lack of it is sometimes an issue around why plans fail, because there just isn't the money. Sometimes Mum and Dad have died. They left the farm to one of the kids with the thing that he was going to pay out the other three, but there's not enough money. So not enough planning up front, not enough saying this is what we need. And sometimes what happens with farms is farmers later on, once all the debts, they got the debt down, farm's going reasonably, they can actually be quite comfortable and just say, look, the farm, it's doing okay. We don't need to work on increasing the profitability. I'm comfortable. All right. But that can be a problem for someone who's coming in, picking up a farm with a lot of debt. They actually need the farm to perform a lot better. And sometimes we need the farm to perform better to get some off-farm assets. So the parents have actually got stuff off-farm to be able to move off, and they've already got, a house or the ability to buy a house. They've already got other investments to give them some income. So sometimes, you could be comfortable, but have actually really looked about what you might need in retirement and can you get it while still achieving what you want for your kids? Risk of marriage breakups. What % of marriages do we think break up at the moment?
60 plus, but that,
I think it's only a third is the number that
oh,
I've been given, but that's a third in history. What's it going to be for the generation now going forward? Don't know, but it could be higher than that. That is a reason why sometimes now you'd look at, instead of, like in your wills, it was always common, you left it to the kids. All right. So now it's much more common to leave it to your kids' trust, and you've already set up a trust for them that might be doing nothing, but it has as the beneficiaries, and we're talking about one for each kid. It has as their beneficiary your child plus his children and grandchildren, and therefore you're leaving it for you're leaving it to your family. Life interest type things complicate things. Mum had a life interest in that half share of that farm. It was left to the kids, but she had a life interest, meaning she got to have all the income while she was alive. That makes it just a lot more complicated to negotiate and get things done, really, from a legal perspective. It isn't as common now. It used to be very common that that's what you did. You left the wife, the husband's will would leave a life interest, would leave his assets to the kids, but a life interest in them to the wife. The wife's will would do the opposite. That was quite common. The other thing is, there's a big risk in leaving assets unequally in a will, and that's because the court's interpretation of fair is equal. All right. And yes, they may take some impact of the fact that if you've had one of the kids on the farm, they've been paid a minimal wage and stuff like that. There may be some impact on that, but by and large, it's fair for a court is equal. So if the kids decide that they weren't treated fairly, the courts might quite likely agree with them. And the risk with that is, of course, is if it may be that the child or thing you were trying to leave the farm to becomes unaffordable.